Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Gunther. I'm the director at Fallingwater, and thanks so much for joining for this month's webinar. I'm joined here on screen, and if you'll raise your hand for me as I introduce you, Marta Wojcik, who's Executive Director and Curator at Frank Lloyd Wright's Westcott House in Springfield, Ohio. Bill James, who's an architect at the Pittsburgh office of Boland Sawinski Jackson. John Reynolds, professor of architecture at Miami University of Ohio. But most importantly, I'm joined by students in Professor Reynolds' Modern Vernacular Studio course. They're all third-year architecture students. And you'll be meeting each of them as they present their projects to you in the coming presentation. They're going to be presenting 4 hypothetical design projects for a Center for the Advancement of American Architecture at Fallingwater. And before we dive into that presentation, just a couple housekeeping items. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat at the bottom of your screen to type those questions in, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll do our best to address those questions. And we are recording today's session, and we'll make it available at fallingwater.org next week. So please share with your friends and family the presentation, which you'll be able to download from fallingwater.org. I'm going to now start the presentation by sharing my screen. So hold on one second while I do that. All right. So this whole idea for a Center for the Advancement of American Architecture emerged last summer during the pandemic. And Professor Reynolds would normally be bringing his students to the Fallingwater campus to immerse in a design build residency program. But of course, the pandemic had other ideas for us. So as John and I were brainstorming alternatives on the phone, and trying to come up with some way that a studio project could still happen, but be carried out remotely by distance learning. We came up with this ambitious idea of designing a new facility at Fallingwater, one that could host exhibitions and educational programs related to promoting emerging trends in modern American vernacular and sustainable design. And why not think big during a pandemic? It's a time when we can think creatively, a time that encouraged innovation, and a time that helped us think outside of the box. And John and I thought if a center like this was to ever exist, why not at Fallingwater? An American architectural masterpiece that since its creation has inspired innovative thinking. So Fallingwater seems like an ideal location to engage the public in conversations about advancing architecture to better serve our present and our future. So to explore this idea of a new building, I had to work with John to first identify a location on the Fallingwater campus where a building like this could take form. So I'll quickly orient you to where the students were designing on the Fallingwater campus. So we'll zoom in. You see Fallingwater pinned here on a Google map. We're situated in the last ridges of the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania. And then as we've kind of zoomed in down onto our specific location in Pennsylvania, you see the location of Fallingwater. On the right of your screen, you see a highway that kind of snakes up to the top of the screen. Right along that highway is a red-roofed barn and corresponding farmhouse. The Kaufman family that built Fallingwater purchased this farmstead in the 1940s and started a dairy farm operation as a collective with local farmers in the region. And then when the Conservancy, the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, took over stewardship of the property in the early 1960s, this facility became to house other functions. And actually, Boland Sawinski Jackson in the early 2000s rehabilitated this structure to a LEED Silver certification to house office space, event space, and multi-purpose space for programming at Fallingwater. So we thought this might be the perfect spot to relate to with a new Center for the advancement of American architecture. And there just happens to be an old pasture just south of the barn, which you can see here. So we asked the students to consider this location. Here it is standing in the meadow, and if you let your eye go beyond that tree that's right in the middle of your field of view, you can see the silo of the barn. So we asked the students to consider this as a location, one that would interact with the vernacular forms of the barn, the farmhouse just beyond it, a one-room school built in the early 1900s, and a small church from the same period across the highway. So all of this dialogue was informing what they would create. And John, now I'll turn it over to you to just kind of give the abstract for your studio project and the guidance that you gave the students to think about as they begin their ideas about this new center for the advancement of American architecture.
Great. Thanks, Justin. As we begin our presentation today, I'd like to thank Justin and the staff of Fallingwater for hosting this event. To Bill James and Marta Wojcik, my thanks for their continued support, thoughtful criticism, and insight into our design activity. To my faculty colleagues and friends, my gratitude for attending this event. And most significantly, to my students whose hard work and dedication to the project has been an inspiration to us all. Thank you. The Miami University Fallingwater Design Build Studio is comprised of students in their third and fourth year undergraduate studio as part of the undergraduate pre-professional degree program in architecture. The fall 2020 studio agenda focused on issues of site-specific tectonic design inspired by American vernacular architecture, aimed at generating a modern vernacular architecture for the American middle landscape. Students studied selected works of American literature, Thoreau's Walden, Whitman's Leaves of Grass, London's To Build a Fire, and film, American Graffiti, Paris, Texas, The River Runs Through It, Pleasantville, Peanut Butter Falcon, Country, The Straight Story, and Smoke as part of a shared journey across the United States with John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie and William Least Heatmoon's Blue Highways, and the ideas and theories of Anne Klein's A Hut of One's Own, Jean Baudrillard's America, Wim Wenders' Once, J.B. Jackson's Discovering the Vernacular Landscape, and Henry Glassey's Vernacular Architecture. The fall 2020 studio design culminated in the Center for the Advancement of American Architecture at Fallingwater. The center intends to support the architectural, environmental, educational practices embodied in the missions of Fallingwater and its director, Justin Gunther, while advancing the theory and practice of American architecture. Sited beside the barn at Fallingwater, the center would build upon the legacy of Fallingwater by encouraging a deeper understanding and appreciation of the built environment through engaging exhibitions, research, and educational programs. To create designs respectful of the existing context, students gained inspiration from Frank Lloyd Wright's ideas of organic architecture, nearby vernacular forms, and principles of sustainable design. The learning objectives of the studio included developing and enhancing student awareness of site-specific tectonic issues grounded in the experience, phenomena, history, and memories associated with the place, in conjunction with contemporary impressions of vernacular architecture and site-specific sustainable design. Students explored the notion of place through architecture with an emphasis on its tectonic expression and its connection to the American vernacular landscape. Students worked together in teams of 4 students in collaboration with the administration and staff of Fallingwater and Bowen Sawinski Jackson. Student proposals for the Center for the Advancement of American Architecture, with its program emphasizing education, exhibition, and outreach, sensitively integrated site-specific, sustainable, vernacularly inflected architectural paradigms with an emphasis on making as a means to understand tectonic issues specific to place. All solutions aimed at realizing a thoughtful interpretation of the vernacular landscape with organic, sustainable architectural paradigms that included an emphasis on research and design. Each student group presentation includes a once narrative inspired by German filmmaker Wim Wenders' lyrical photographic essay of the American landscape of the same name that established their attitude towards the site and situation as a preamble to their project presentations. Our initial studio activity began with a reflection on Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing. I Hear America Singing by American poet Walt Whitman was first published in the 1860 edition of his book, Leaves of Grass. Written on the eve of the Civil War, it presents a vision of America as a harmonious community. From city to country, land to sea, the poem envisions America as a place where people do honest, meaningful, and satisfying work, and celebrating that work in song. America emerges from the work of these many and diverse individual people. Their separate work comes together to form a coherent whole. In this way, the poems account America is a nation where individuality and unity are balanced, each producing and reinforcing the other. This poetic, democratic notion of America became the students' and studio's point of departure from which to explore and construct a uniquely modern vernacular. It is from this vantage that we begin our presentation.
I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear.
Those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong.
The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam.
The mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work.
The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on the steamboat deck.
The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench, the hatter singing as he stands.
The woodcutter's song, the plowboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon intermission, or at sundown.
The delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing.
Each singing what belongs to him or her and to none else.
The day what belongs to the day. At night the party of young fellows, robust, friendly.
Singing with open mouths their strong melodious songs.
And now we have our first team comprised of Colin Finnegan from Hamilton, Ohio, majoring in architecture, Mackenzie Kicker from Wait Hill, Ohio, majoring in architecture with a minor in entrepreneurship. Allie Rising, St. Louis, Missouri, major, architecture, minor, German. Macy Whitaker from Wadsworth, Ohio, majoring in architecture with a minor in art and architectural history.
Once we encountered a barn in Mill Run, Pennsylvania, where there was a strong relationship to renowned architecture, where the tranquility of nature and simplicity of design sat together in harmony, and where the vernacular character of the site celebrated a living memory. We seek to design a center for the advancement of American architecture at Fallingwater that continues to reflect the historical narrative of the site, where the hearth creates a sense of community, where form highlights views, where the gently sloped terrain encourages a series of cascading forms, where layered elements create a powerful feeling of order, and where the old and new are unified. The following proposal for the Center of the Advancement of American Architecture at Fallingwater draws inspiration from both Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater, as well as Boleyn Sawinski Jackson's Barn at Fallingwater, an adaptable, minimal design. Our structure aligns with the barn and follows the cascading landscape, demonstrating a quiet presence on the site. Timber framing and natural materials reflect the beauty of the landscape surrounding the center. The use of large windows and louvers blur the line between indoors and outdoors, encouraging visitors to engage with and enjoy the site. Details in the structure and the inclusion of a three-season space begin to expose the flexibilities and intricacies of the design. Additionally, our arrangement of the program creates slippages that reference both the pre-existing barn as well as Wright's planning strategies. This allows dynamic volumes to develop in a sequential manner. Ultimately, our structure seeks to reference historic elements while incorporating them into the requirements of the program within a modern setting. Next.
This is a map including our proposal as well as the pre-existing site. You will see this map again as other groups showcase their work. So to give you a lay of the land, on the left is Bolin Sawinski Jackson's barn at Fallingwater, while our proposal sits on the right with a series of 3 distinct forms. Our project engages the whole site to connect the pre-existing barn with our newly proposed project. We have created a path system based off of the placement of the barn that encourages users to stop and reflect as they pass by pre-existing site elements. Looking further right beyond our newly proposed structures, we engage the site with 2 pavilions that offer a halfway point between the path coming from Fallingwater from the south and our main building sequence. This allows our design to dissolve from principally man-made forms into the natural landscape as one moves from our structures beyond the pavilions and further into the meadow. Next.
Our proposal is inserted into the site with the education building morphing into the terrain, covered by a green roof that extends to the retail space. The 3-season space acts as a circulation path between the 3 buildings as an outdoor connector to the indoors. By having the circulation as a covered walkway, the museum goers get to experience the site by walking building from building in a comfortable manner. Next.
We've separated the program into 3 components as mentioned before. We have the gallery, education, and retail. The first floor of our gallery space has the larger display sequence with partitions that guide patrons through the space. The glass wall behind the 3-season louvers permits light to enter the space, and the louvers themselves allow the light to be modified according to patrons' comfort outside the structure and may be adjusted to better suit any present exhibitions. On the left, stairs border a glass wall that looks out towards the barn, farther engaging patrons with the surrounding area. The second floor, which may be separated into smaller galleries or used as another large presentation space, has a balcony that overlooks the interior courtyard formed by the 3 structures. The northernmost structure, the Education Center, also has 2 floors and is integrated into the landscape to maintain our facility's subdued site presence. The top floor above ground level and houses the large flex space. Like the gallery, its glass facade sits behind the 3-season space louvers, thus permitting adjustable exterior light. Light also enters the uppermost level through 2 skylights. While the lower level is fully underground, light penetrates through the stairwell and is visible from the office and training room. Finally, the smallest form facing the northwest holds the cafe and bookstore. One enters and sees the cafe counter and then passes through a compressed area to be released into the bookstore, which is anchored by a hearth. The drawing to the right illustrates the massing and structure a bit more. There's a thin profile green roof on the gallery that spreads over the gallery deck and onto the retail space, further engaging our building with the site as our structure is a visible extension of pre-existing nature. Next.
Our project attempts to represent the context of the site and the surroundings around the site. The use of an existing grid on site in reference to the barn allowed for an organizational principle to weave our building into the site. These 6 perspective views capture the overall quality of the integration our building has to the site. The exposed timber framing throughout the gallery, education, and retail areas is evidence of part of that integration that attempts to seamlessly transfer the building into the surrounding landscape. Next. The connections of the beams passing through each of the notch columns throughout the interior of our building reflects the slippages that occur in the overall building form. The 3-season space acts as a transitional thoroughfare from one space to the next, without leaving you completely exposed to the elements. While we realize walking outside in more extreme weather conditions is not always comfortable, recognizing one's place in nature is something we feel is crucial to our design. Most buildings today are climate controlled and isolate patrons from their surroundings. With these lures, we can keep patrons relatively comfortable while providing them with a deliberate recognition of their place within the surroundings there between programmatic elements. Next.
So this Center for the Advancement of American Architecture incorporates modern vernacular and utilizes an integrated approach to the site to form a building that reflects the neighboring natural and built environments. Through materials and form, we have designed an adaptable structure to educate the public and celebrate American architecture and design. Thank you.
And at this point, I see that we are available for commentary. Bill and Marta, would you like to offer any thoughts? I'll keep my comments as closure since they've heard a lot from me over the semester.
Go ahead, Marta.
No, Bill, you go first.
You're always too kind.
I'll let professional to address it first.
Well, as always, I'm incredibly impressed by the work that comes out of the studio and particularly with the collaboration here at Fallingwater. This particular project, I think, is really lovely, and its ability to feather the line between inside and outside, between landscape and built environment. And so I think it's doing that in a respectful manner and a sensitive manner that addresses its context while also being responsive, although not completely honorific, to Fallingwater nearby. I particularly like the detail in which you've looked at the articulation of the facade, that's responsiveness to its orientation, and how you've applied this both to interior and exterior spaces. I think that really helps to reinforce this. I think also your insight into elevation within the site is really critical, how you've invested in these green roof elements, knowing that people will be coming in from parking up above and descending into the site. So I think experientially, there offers a lot of great and rich moments within the space.
I agree with Bill, and couple things that I found significant to consider in the context of this proposal is, for one, I was wondering about the green roof, the presence of that with your design. And at first I didn't quite understand it. There is one view that shows the green roof kind of spill over the colonnade, I believe. And without understanding that you did pretty big intervention, right? You basically dug into topography. Some of your buildings are underground basically. And that's what made it clear to me why this makes sense, because otherwise I was like, well, this is a countryside. People naturally will be there. There's a lot of nature around. Green roofs have their, obviously in urban environments, they so much needed. But in this context, I wasn't sure. But the moment I understood how this flows, it seems like it's a great application of that. And another thing that I was wondering, if I understand it correctly, it seems like by doing all that, you pretty much addressed in terms of ADA accessibility. It seems like there are no stairs really in your proposal, right? Do I understand it correctly?
There are stairs, but where there are stairs, there are elevators. Yes.
Yeah, because they are not prominent in your design, right? And, I think that it's a tricky thing, I think, to consider. I feel like we should be liberated to some extent from the stairs, the idea of segregation of spaces and making secondary entrance for people with disabilities. I hope it's going to be a thing of the past, unless we can't avoid it. Let's take, historic sites where we can't, it's a historic nature of the building that does not let us change that in any way. And we struggle big time with ADA accessibility. So I loved how naturally this came as a kind of additional beautiful thing that came out of your project.
Wonderful comments, Marta. And I would only add a few thoughts that I think might give some sense of the whole, but wonderful comments, Bill and Marta. For me, the strength of the scheme is in its grace, its sobriety, its simplicity, which is not easy to achieve. I think of the film The River Runs Through It, and the Reverend McLean in his office, and the young son bringing the piece of writing down to the office, and the Reverend instructing the young child, half again is long, half again is long. And I think here the students achieved the half again is long in their careful and measured distillation or reduction to arrive at the site DNA, its codes. Like Marta, I'm sure Justin's not interested in direct recitation of any Wright motif in a direct stylistic reference. And I think here the students have gone deep. They've gone deep and they've discovered a kind of site DNA, which is based on memory and phenomenon and their experiences of the place. And as the students mentioned the word weaving, I think it's significant. That was an important stratagem for Wright in his planning, both at the landscape level as well as the tartan planning of many of his buildings. And I think they've achieved a number of Wright gestures without a wholesale responding to a Wrightian motif. The entry is subtle, the aspect of weaving, the presence of the calming court, the lightness of the project, which to me, this is not a Usonian gesture, but yet has some of the characteristics, the layered transitions inside, outside, the lightness of it, and the landscape intervention, I think very effective. And I think of the work of important mid-century landscape architects, such as Dan Kiley, creating outdoor rooms and events. And I think there is a subtle recollection of that DNA without any direct stylistic reference. And I appreciate very much the layered inside-outside transitions. I think of the barn, especially the upper 19th century bank barn with its open planking. And I think of the louvers, while not a direct reference, I think there's a wonderful aha moment for someone who knows the campus and has experienced the 19th century bank barn and that layered transition, its light qualities, the patterns of the wind and the movement of the sun, light and shadow, etc. So it's a wonderful exercise and I'm really pleased for this group. I want to thank them and our critics for their fine comments. Well done. Our second team is comprised of Bryce Hendrickson from Maysville, Kentucky, majoring in architecture, minoring in film studies. Tori Hoffman from Belmore, New York, majoring in architecture. Emma Richards from Westerville, Ohio, majoring in architecture. And Cam Rowe from Chicago, majoring in architecture. Welcome.
Once in the rural town of Mill Run, Pennsylvania, next, please. There was a piece of art tucked away in the woods. It is a statement on modernity, a cultural influence. By bringing people together, it inspires learning. There is an emphasis on the importance of being connected with nature. This place is an intersection. It combines landscape with man-made design and brings the outdoors in. An inspiration for the future by freezing a moment in history.
We were inspired by ancient petroglyphs carved into the landscape by native tribes from the region. Our design seeks to sculpt the ground plane like the first Americans sculpted their landscape. The three main structures aim to create a community with the existing elements on the site. The buildings surround a courtyard that opens to the northwest, signaling Fallingwater, a monument to American architecture. Next.
We wanted our project to be carved into the site and follow the natural slope and surroundings. There's a simple pathway leading from the barn to the center. As you approach, you're greeted by three buildings. By separating our program into three distinct structures, we were able to create a gravity around the central courtyard, with the structures orbiting an extension of the field, making our structure not only on, but of the site. You are welcomed by a glass entrance, which gives you a pleasant glimpse into the courtyard. The design of the courtyard transitions from more refined greenery to more natural and eventually becomes the existing field. We also have stadium seating, which opens up and pulls you in. It points towards the direction of falling water, which is of course the main feature and something we wanted to pay reverence to. Next. Viewing the elevations of our building, you can see how we delivered our idea of carving into the site. Each building is embedded in the slope like the petroglyphs we were inspired by. The roof of each building reflects that slope and also opens the interior space up to provide the visitor with a beautiful, uninterrupted view of nature. Green roofs provide additional insulation and increased stormwater management, as well as additional economic benefits. They also serve to further integrate and blend the building into the hillside. It's also clear in these drawings how unrefined our courtyard remains. We intended for this area to simply be the field projecting into our structure and becoming the focal point. Next.
The first stop in our design is the arrival to the lobby. This space has a very open layout and receives an array of natural light as it's fully encased in glass and opens to the centralized courtyard. From the lobby, there are three separate structures you could enter, which include the administrative building, the bookstore cafe, and the gallery space. The administrative building contains the staff offices on the entry level and the educational spaces on the lower level. Being the only structure on our site with 2 levels, visitors can experience the slope that the design is carved into. To the northwest of the lobby is the cafe and bookstore, and a gallery space is to the north. Along with the central courtyard, there is a smaller courtyard adjacent to the cafe and gallery space, which has an outdoor seating and access to the cafe as well. Each space has a direct indoor-outdoor relationship, which has played a crucial role in our design. Next. Our site walk explores the exterior of our design. From left to right, the first rendering shows the entrance to the site as you're greeted with a small parking lot. The second is the approach to the center, followed by the arrival to the entrance. The fourth is a descent to the north facade of the administrative space, and the step terrace is a gesture to Fallingwater as mentioned before. The last is the final overview of the design. As you progress through our site, you get a sense of the untouched landscape and the way our design is an extension of it. We intended for our structure to be sustainable in more than just a technical sense. By harvesting the materials from our structure from local sources, we hope to engage the community with the construction and continual success of the center and reduce our carbon footprint. Next.
In our interior perspectives, you can see how we use simple connections at every scale to give the project a straightforward attitude. From the way our columns meet the beams to the way our building gently carves into the landscape, we sought to maintain lucidity and clarity. The simplicity of our structure encourages visitors to maintain focus on their natural surroundings and the work being done at the center. Through multiple avenues, our structure seeks to create a warm and hospitable space for visitors, while constantly encouraging them to engage with the site. By creating a transparency between our entry threshold and the central courtyard, we intend to welcome visitors and remind them that our building is merely a vessel for the study of vernacular architecture and its connection to nature and local culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we open up the comments from Marta and Bill?
You really should go this time, Marta.
Okay, I will. I won't put you on the spot all the time. although I have to just a side note, you know, I participated, I had an honor to participate in a number of those critiques over the years as we worked with Miami University students, and I learned so much from it. There's so much work that goes into it, and you know, I appreciate the final results, which in this particular example, I'm drawn to interior views. You made it so convincing about the warmth of space, the lightness, the clerestory windows doing its work to create really intimate but yet space that is full of light and beauty. And you know, the image of the bookshelves and how they create rhythm and pattern within a space, and yet you know, it's a kind of I feel great symbolic gesture, not only symbolic because ultimately they would be filled with books, but the point of the center is to be this repository of knowledge. So I love that. By the way, I think it's probably from the beginning that you established bookstore and coffee bar as part of the program for the building. I just love it. I love it much more than retail and coffee shop. It's much more, it emphasizes what those places are about. So again, the stair thing, I think the inspiration is drawn for any stairs in your designs. Obviously, it's one of the practical ways to address the changes in topography. Certain views show it as a very subtle increase. Some showed it more dramatic when I think instantly of, or I don't know, Art Institute of Chicago or some of those, as opposed to other alternative, not exactly like European influence or any of those, you know, more traditional cultural sites that I feel we want to kind of get away from, if we can, from that type of vocabulary in architecture that welcomes everyone. So that's, but I see that you gently introduce this, you know, there's definitely the accessibility addressed, and it's like when we even the image here, we see that it's rather gentle and beautiful gesture. So thank you so much. It's a great work.
Thank you, Marta and Billy. I just have a few thoughts. I really appreciate its reference to the Vernacular Farmstead, the wonderful series of events, however subtle or lucid and clear as you've described them, between the existing barn and the new project. I think there's a great care and subtlety to your transitions, which are handled, I think, very effectively. And I also appreciate your approach to sustainability and the idea not only of local sourcing, but of the prospect of community engagement, which I think is significant. I think the courtyard is a very important element to the design. I like the way that it sets up the reference and its orientation towards the Church of the Brethren and the Bear Run School and the path that takes us to Fallingwater. I also appreciate it as this place of pause, this place of reflection, which I think is important. I really very much appreciate the sculpted or bas-relief approach to the base plane, derived from native local petroglyphs. I think that was a wonderful reference. And I think of others who very successfully worked in that mode in a different manner. I think of Noguchi's contoured playgrounds in New York and his wonderful work and the way that he handled the base plane. So I really appreciate that gesture, because for me, the careful articulation of the base plane and its solidity, so to speak, and then the lightness of the pavilions as they rest on it, I think is a very effective juxtaposition. And, you know, in looking at it from the perspective of theory, I also think of Semper's 4 elements, the careful articulation of the kind of stereotomy of the ground plane, beautiful reference to the hearth. Wright would reference that as well in his ideas around the hearth and the cantilevered stack, and then the woven facade, and of course the roof. And I think there's a wonderful Again, clear articulation, coming back to your words from the student team, clarity and lucidity around those elements. I also appreciate the vertical striations in the interiors and the reference to the barn, which I thought was really lovely. And then the sort of hinged planning made me think of other eclectic modernists like Alto in the way that he handled such transitions in relation to the land. So really well done. And I really appreciate the project very much. Many congratulations.
John, we can't get Bill not comment on this, right?
Oh, right. My goodness, what's wrong with me? Thanks, Marta.
No, I think most has been said. I just think that building on some of Marta's comments about accessibility in the steps, I think creates an opportunity in landscape forming. And I think particularly of the amount of impervious surface on the site. Also, it would be interesting to begin to take another try at weaving in some of the land more into those elements. And I think it could lead to a richer and more accessible approach and descent from the building. Another thing is, I wonder if committing to a more delicate pavilion in the center, even pulling away some of the masonry base that we see in the upper right of this image to highlight this delicate glass and green connection between these more solid programmed elements might add greater clarity that this is more of a transitional space, and that the others are anchoring the program within the site. Yeah, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the history that you're drawing upon. I think even I saw someone in the chat mention the pre-European influence and history that we're also addressing on the site. I think that's really significant.
Our third team is comprised of Teddy Walker from Evanston, Illinois, majoring in architecture, Hannah Mulle from Miamisburg, Ohio, majoring in both architecture and Italian, Paige Cardwell from St. Louis, Missouri, majoring in architecture, minoring in entrepreneurship, and Kayla Smith from Cleveland, majoring in architecture. Welcome.
Once in America, the very lay of land is individual with architecture full of dignity, distinct and strong, framing what is truly American architecture. Promoting experience that is distinctly American. Mediation of outdoor and indoor spaces. Thoughtful integration. Grounded firmly. Cohesive environments. Into seamless transitions. Utilizing raw local materials. Simple construction for unique experiences.
Through the integration of the building with the natural environment and the mediation of indoor and outdoor spaces, the Center for the Advancement of American Architecture creates a distinct experience. Slipping back and forth down the hillside and fully engaging with the meadow, it represents cohesion between site and structure. It creates strong terrestrial sense as it moves with the land and grounds itself firmly in its site and context. Next. Here in plan is shown the relationship of the center to the barn and the interaction with the landscape in the form of terraces and paths surrounding the three programmatic functions of the center. There is a beautiful axial motion between the barn and the main entrance to the center, with the alley of dogwood trees and crushed gravel path that, again, moves with the undulation of the site. The west section shows the facade facing the road, as well as its size and proportion relative to the barn. In the east section, the center is seen from behind as though it is sliding out of the hillside and into the meadow. The main entrance takes you into the retail portion through the front terrace with a ramp to the right of the terrace. And as you move up the hill, there's the gallery portion at the top, and finally, the education portion nearest to the road. The circulation portion up and down the hillside incorporates ramps along with its steps. Next. The interstitial spaces between these programmatic portions are moments of transition that serve to pull the outside in through views, ventilation, and access to the outdoor rooms, as it were. In the north and south elevation, the smooth way that the terraces and steps interact with the site is shown, while the sections show how the interior space steps up the hillside. Additionally, the pitch of each roof changes, opening up further as it moves down the slope. The stepping motion is subtle to match the gentle slope of the hill. Next.
Here's the ground plan. Here we can see the breakdown of spaces and their functions. The building on the top is the gallery space, and the middle being the entrance and retail section. And then in the lower building is where the education wing is located, all broken up by smaller and more intimate transitional spaces. On the right is shown a view of the retail portion, the middle structure, looking towards the entrance and the LA of the trees towards the barn. Depicted in the terrace renderings, you can see our design intent of having a lot of windows, framing the illusion of the indoor-outdoor relationship. And the high windows also bringing in natural light and ventilation in the temperate months. The stepping off of terraces melt down seamlessly into the meadow, as well as bringing between programmatic functions, allowing one of opportunity for repose with the option to move completely outdoors or immerse themselves in the gorgeous surrounding landscape. Next. This is our visual site walk. In the top left is as you are approaching the entrance of the building from the barn. One enters the alley of trees on axis from the barn. Moving up the steps, one meets the integration of the site as the meadow spills onto the front terrace. The terracing further winds around with various paths that set you up with many views of both architecture and nature. Following the path to the southwest side of the building, one experiences the duality of intimate and communal outdoor rooms, framed with both nature and man-made elements. Next.
The interiors of the center are expressive and view focused through the use of natural light and ventilation from all of the clerestory windows. The open floor plan allows for maximum circulation and expiration. Next. With poetic gestures and considerations of the modern vernacular, the Center of the Advancement of American Architecture comes together through the integration of the building with the natural environment and the mediation of indoor and outdoor spaces. It fully engages with the meadow and brings the site context, the simple construction, and the elegance of nature together into a terrestrial and cohesive whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. And can we open it up for comments?
Of course, another lovely project. I really like the efficiency and the modesty of repeating similar type of shed roof form in a triptych here, but slightly moving it off center to allow for the movement through the site and the engagement with it. I think what becomes important then is the gasket and the space between. And I think continuing to study those moments and what might make them special. I think when we might have looked at this project previously, I had commented that I think looking at those as times to decompress between these different programmed areas potentially could be helpful. Also using them to help mitigate the grade change between each of these spaces. So I continue to encourage you to maybe look at that. I think also just from a technical standpoint, studying some of your cut fill on the site and looking at how you're engaging up the hill and how to repurpose some of that earth closer to Mill Run Road to be able to allow that final gesture we see here in the upper right closest to us engage more into the land and maybe be feathered back in and a little bit more mounded. It might be able to also help you dissolve some of those railings and guardrails that are reading a little bit more prominently. But your natural ventilation agenda, I think, for this project is really strong and would serve you well as you look into other passive strategies.
So, you know, I do enjoy some moments you present here, like even the picture we see here with this courtyard that seems intimate and kind of beautiful outdoor space, and also on the inside that play of light and glass and wood. It creates this warmth and inviting feeling. And those are some of the moments you clearly can see. Also, I really love the some of the concepts with those one-story glass spaces that are really quite beautiful, and I can see that they would just really add a lot to create a more intimate space for visitors. I guess, you know, again, my question is with the number of, you know, with the elevation and number of steps, and is that really necessary to enjoy this site, to have such you know, dramatic number of those, you know, those stairs? And again, the inspiration behind it, I can see why you do that, but I just wonder from practical, and you know, like when you approach, you can see clearly the beautiful pathway up, and then there is that very very distinct side of the building with all those stairs, and as you go down, you have to change direction, kind of get out of there. I wonder what's the view there, so I may not fully understand what you're trying to accomplish with visitors going down there and having a view, but that would be my question, whether that's really necessary.
Wonderful thoughts, Marta and Bill. I would only add a few. I appreciate very much the comments, Bill, your comments on the management of the land vis-a-vis cut and fill and transitions of these terraces. Marta's thoughts about movement, I think, are very important as you reconcile the stepping gesture with these practicums, right, which are so important. But in talking about some of the strengths of the scheme, I think it's about transitions, which are handled, I think, very deftly. And I very much appreciate the layering and the transitions from interior to exterior, which I think are handled well. I really appreciate the site specificity to some of the terrace gestures in terms of view shed and the relationship to certain site experiences, which I think are carefully considered. I also enjoy very much the qualities of light in your spaces, which I think, again, I think of Alto and I think of the idea of forest space. And when I look at your spaces, I get that sense of the space forming around oneself in relation to your movement through space and the relationship of yourself, the body in space, its movement to structure, and then being pulled by certain carefully considered landscape events, which are episodic and delightful. Also sense that the ventilation qualities in these spaces would be really lovely. And I could see that definitely, you know, 3-season possibilities for this building to be quite open and diaphanous. So thank you very much, Team 3, well done. Our fourth team is comprised of Lydia Knoll, who joins us from Akron and majoring in architecture, minoring in art and architectural history. Gilbert Adamwampong from Fairfield, Ohio, majoring in architecture. Ben Coleman from Cincinnati, majoring in architecture and minoring in urban design. And Reba Schaut from Athens, Ohio, with a double major in architecture and sustainability. Welcome.
Within nature, we manifest our vision of American architecture. Taken from and around which we are inspired. Our vision is fine as sand and clear as glass, while creating relations to surrounding elements. Intimacy and transparency define transitions. By layering simple forms that are firmly anchored to the land, visitors are firmly immersed into nature. By redefining paths, we create a most welcoming environment. So as we approach our design, we drew inspiration from our vernacular artifact transformation of the wigwam bark layering to create these transitional layers as one progresses into the building. In doing so, these layers are then connected by paths that weaves into the different program details, similar to a rice tapestry pattern. So then the center becomes a place of education that emulates vernacular architecture and immerses the visitors into Fallingwater and the sun. My teammates will now take you into further details on our approach to site and our social construction to program.
When approaching our design, we wanted to create a clear connection between the barn and Fallingwater. We started by creating a path between the barn and our site that establishes the beginning of the weaving of programs. The trail from Fallingwater leads straight into the bottom right corner of our structure, and we have connected the trail from the top right to lead into the entrance of our building. From there, we have decided to organize the program into 3 different groups: gallery, education, and retail, each spinning out off of the central courtyard. Once entering our circulation path that is highlighted in blue, one will lead or be led to all of the separate buildings. This weave of program elements creates a connection to all site surroundings. The retail space is located at the bottom, the education at the top, and the galleries are lined along the right side with the path weaving in and out to further create a connection to the site. Next.
Sections and elevations are the thin roof lines that sit lightly on the site and cascade down the topography. They descend in a series that allow visitors to look through each building and out toward Fallingwater and the nature of the surrounding site. Locally sourced timber framing was used for the structure. Knife-edged beams sandwich columns from one building to the next. They are woven into the site and paths and set out on a 14-foot interval grid. Next.
In the ground plan, you can see how the spaces of the program are connected to the use of indoor and outdoor spaces, with indoor being white and outdoor being gray. This allows people to move seamlessly between the interior and exterior, fully joined with the nature of the site, with the courtyard acting as a central room. The centralization makes it possible for people from all the various programs, whether visitor, student, or staff, to gather around the hearths and form community. The indoor thoroughfare moves up with the topography and connects the minor and major galleries. The lower images show the view from both the top and bottom of the path, framing the views in both directions. Next. The site walk is a series of images that guide you through our project. We decided that following the main circulation path would best show the character of the buildings. The first image is coming up from the parking lot where visitors and staff may park. The path follows the sight line that connects the barn at Fallingwater with the interior of our structure. The trellis, better seen in the next image, frames the view of the visitor and merges seamlessly with the structure of our interior. In the second view, you can see the exterior of the cafe and further up the hill to the education center. This image shows the distinct layers of roof heights between our program elements and how one can interact with the lower elevation of the site. The view of the bookstore shows the direction, or looks towards the direction of Fallingwater. Throughout the project, we use glass to remain connected with the site and features. The central courtyard, as I mentioned in the ground plan, connects all the programs and invites visitors to gather in a loose, informal environment. The next view is from the top of the thoroughfare, which creates a frame view towards Fallingwater and shows the gardens that brings the meadow into the space. This further blurs the barrier between interior and exterior. The education building looks over the whole site to create an experience for visitors and establish an appreciation of landscape and nature. This top path from Education Center connects back to the barn at Fallingwater through a second major sightline. After walking through our project, you can better understand our concept and see how intertwined the programs are with the surrounding landscape. Next.
So the main gallery pictured on the top left creates views into the two minor galleries and three season spaces sitting lower on the topography. Sunlight spills in through the clerestory windows on the left side of the gallery. The key element pictured on the top right is our vernacular gesture to the bark layering of the wigwam, which is made out of recycled aluminum foam. This acts as a shading device for the three season spaces with ADA ramps. Pictured bottom left are the windows on the second level of the education building that frame views towards the barn and pathways that weave into the structure's entrance. The bottom right picture shows the sandwiching relationship the columns have between the two knife-edged beams. It's secured into place using a metal plate and a series of bolts.
So as you can see in our presentation, our design purpose was mainly centered on the principle of interweaving of layers by respecting to site tectonics, the historical and the vernacular background of the area. So in following these principles, we create a most welcoming environment for our visitors. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gilbert and team. Marta, Bill, we welcome your comments.
I'll let you go this time, Marta.
Well, by the way, John, we welcome questions from the audience, right?
Absolutely.
So right now would be the time to add some of your questions, and we really appreciate. We monitor the chat, and we need to make sure that students see the feedback. It's wonderful to get it. So let us know more what you think. You know, I love how you simulated for us this experience of the space, and I hope that I would be there one day on like as the sun goes down and I can just sit there and reflect on important things and relax and enjoy that sun, just, you know, this filtering through the glass and in such a subtle way. It's so beautiful. It really gives us a sense of how you would feel in this building. And it's just really, I think the lightness of it all, and but also with some really dramatic views. I think there was this pathway from the parking as you approach the building. It's very dramatic. It's really quite strong, and there are those moments in this building that you really show your personality. And you know, some of the also intimate spaces such as the courtyard. I think there was like a view at the it was from the cafe, I think, toward education space, where I then connected the dots, and I imagine it was intentional, but you know, that picture you showed from the Taliesin from Taliesin East, the courtyard there, it almost feels reminiscent of that, but in a very original way. It's in no way literal interpretation of that space, but you can definitely feel that kind of sensible approach to this site. So really appreciate what you guys did here.
Thank you, Marta. Billy?
Yes. I think what is most striking about this response to the project is the way in which you've broken down this program into lots of smaller spaces that make you want to explore the building. I think the building has a certain ability to dissolve into the landscape and not to be readily discernible as one enters it. And so I think there's a richness to that. I think it speaks to the spirit of exploration that I think undergirds a lot of what is interesting in American architecture, I think it also leads you to explore the broader world and context and your strong connections to the land. I'd also say that your use of materiality is interesting. I don't know what agency there might have been in picking aluminum, but obviously in the city of Pittsburgh, which is not far away, and where the Kaufmans, who built and lived in Fallingwater, did the majority of their business, is also known for its production of aluminum. And so I think that that's a potentially interesting connection. Some of the patterning makes me think of some of Sullivan's writings on ornament. I think it does seem to be maybe a bit formally overworked, perhaps, in its articulation. And so I wonder, as you continue to explore this building and its detailing, how it might more seamlessly integrate into the rest of the work. But really lovely, very delicate, how those roof lines just slightly light on the program structure. It seems like they've kind of floated into space and are all just resting there. And these minor moves between elevations are really strong and work well compositionally. So I commend you.
Great comments, Bill and Marta. And Justin, I know you've been monitoring the chat, so I'll keep my comments brief. And as Marta suggested very aptly, that we could embrace any comments coming in through the chat. So with that, I'll just say that I want to echo Bill's comments. I really appreciate the way the scheme seems to dissolve, and it's rich in its layered episodic experiences, which I really appreciate. And there is a really wonderful series of events inside outside, but the weaving aspect and the way that the pavilions are broken down into a series of moments or events, it's very much like a good film. I also appreciate the structural gestures in the way that they also contribute to the spatial awareness and its lightness. And while a number of references were noted, I was thinking about certain experiences in Japan, the lightness of the architecture, the sensitivity to the tectonics and the art of joining, and of course the transitions outside. But I really appreciated the lightness. And when you opened with that discussion of the hovering roofs, I really appreciated that. And I think it allows us to immerse ourselves in nature in a very vivid and coherent way. So well done. And I know that there's a number of posts. Justin, if I could turn it over back to you in terms of maybe monitoring some of the chat and getting our audience involved.
Before we get to questions, I just want to say thank you, John, for your leadership through this project, and obviously to the students. I mean, what an ambitious idea to begin with, and to see it handled with such elegance, such beauty, and such sensitivity to Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater, but also to the vernacular forms that are neighboring this structure into the landscape. So just to have you all help us visualize this idea, help to kind of bring it to life, just really remarkably inspiring. So thank you all. And to Bill and to Marta, your thoughtful comments, and of course your guidance throughout the critique process as well. Thank you for that. I think the students should be very, very proud. So congratulations to all of you. Just to start off the questioning, if any of the students would like to chime in, anything that you found particularly challenging, either in the program, dealing with the site, relating to vernacular form, relating to the landscape, designing in the shadow of Fallingwater, anything that you found particularly challenging?
I think I could maybe speak to designing in the shadow of Fallingwater a little bit. I know there was a question a little bit maybe up in the chat that asked about referencing certain aspects of Fallingwater, so the stacked stone or the true structural cantilevers. I think every group has some sort of reference to falling water in their structure. But I think something that was very important to us was not replicating that because it had already been done. And, you know, this is the goal here is to, you know, honor what comes before us, but also to look to the future and make something new. So I think that while those things were considered, I know at least in our group, we paid very careful attention not to just be direct copycats or I don't know, make anything seem kind of like puzzle pieced together. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that as well.
I can add on to that a little bit. I think another balance that we struggled to achieve was the idea of vernacular architecture, and I think that goes along with the tradition of Fallingwater and the tradition of architecture in the area. You do want to be original and find a new voice that can communicate with those old structures. Greg Bell asked if we were trying to find a new definition of vernacular architecture in the 21st century. And I think vernacular architecture is kind of a continuum. I don't know if you can redefine it. It's more about looking at the past and being able to create a new structure that communicates with that past while not replicating it.
Excellent definition of vernacular, Bryce. Any other students want to chime in?
I was just going to mention kind of little on the same topic, but one of the things most challenges that I'm not sure if anyone else was just not getting that full on in-person experience of going to Fallingwater, seeing like the site and everything. We did have a lot of good guidance, and especially like the things that you, Justin, sent us over like all the pictures and stuff was really helpful. But it was at first a bit challenging, like understanding everything if you've not been to like the site itself. We do have Emma in our studio who got a chance to see the site, so it's really good getting her help since as a student getting that firsthand experience. But yeah, it was just kind of like that understanding without actually have been visiting to the site, which is kind of challenging at first.
Okay.
Sorry. To answer one of the questions in the chat, yes, it was all we were all remote. We didn't come together to do this, so.
A more technical question that was posed, how did you think about the heavy rainfall and high snowfalls of Western Pennsylvania? Did you consider rainwater runoff as part of your designs? And of course, that also deals with how you dealt with the sloping terrain.
I know for our project, we made sure that our pathway going from the barn to our site, we had a little bit of a ledge to make sure that the pathway wouldn't be flooded. But in terms of, you know, like we had our courtyard, and I think we just wanted to keep our presence on the site very light to ensure that there was plenty of natural vegetation and stuff that would be there to prevent too much rainfall. And we just wanted to try and be really light with the way that we put our structure on the site.
Yeah, and along kind of similar lines, dealing with climatic conditions, large expanses of glass. Did any of you worry about building efficiency because of those large expanses of glass?
Great question.
Someone will jump in.
Any takers?
John, can you think of a particular project that, and you know, many of these are designed as all season or multi-seasonal spaces, but John, do you have any comments on that regard?
Well, I think it comes back to a certain experience that I had with Stefan Banish's work in the Netherlands in the Forestry Research Institute, and in the central courtyards, which are unconditioned spaces, to get to the point. And through the glazing, they're able to get significant gain in the winter. And even in days, and I visited the site maybe half a dozen times, you'd see researchers out in those gardens, wearing a light sweater. And, Banish's response to sustainability is it's okay to wear a sweater. So I'm not arguing for an irresponsible approach to user comfort, but I do think it's important that these buildings breathe. I think while there were considerable expanses of glass, there was careful attention paid to overhangs and sun angles relative to both the autumnal, spring, winter, and summer solstices. So I think considerable care was taken in a number of schemes. For example, the first scheme had a very careful louvered protection system. I would expect too that, while not shown in the student renderings, that there would be opportunities for both external and internal sun protection. So, it's a wonderful question and it's very responsibly delivered, but I think there would be opportunities there. And I also think that the roof strategies in each case would help mitigate some of those concerns.
I think for our project, we had large expanses of glass. Most of them faced the south so that in the winter they could have the sun come in and warm the space. And we also paid attention to ventilation through the spaces as well in the clerestory windows. And we also had overhangs on all of our buildings that were, I think, around 2 to 4 feet each.
Well
Thank
done.
you. Yeah. Another question deals with the strong rectilinear forms that all of the designs have. And were any other shapes, for lack of a better term, considered by the teams in their designs?
I think simplicity and orthogonality were natural conclusions that we all drew from the vernacular architecture, barn building, simple forms, rather than some Frank Gehry floopy curves. I think just seemed a little bit more appropriate to all of us. I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody when I say that, but at least in our group, I think that was the feeling that we got.
I think there was probably a certain amount of conditioning too. I recall, Justin, the experience we had at the Oler Farmstead. We were asked to design a gate or entrance, and I think you probably in your previous life were part of that discussions. And I remember the students, the first one had a water element and a low wall. And it was again, like half again as much. That is, we were encouraged to dial it down a notch, and we ended up with a simple farm gate, as you know, because that paid attention and respect to the local Bear Run community and the life of the subsistence farmsteads that surround it, and understanding our place in that continuum. So that might explain some of it, but Bryce's articulation was much more erudite. Thanks, Bryce. Well done.
All right, well, I think this is a wonderful summary comment, and then I'll turn it over to John, Martin, and Bill if they'd like to make any additional comments. This is from one of our participants. Wow, exclamation point. What impressive work from these young people. I'm excited for the future of American architecture. And I think that really does sum it up. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you. Wonderful work. John, Marta, or Bill, any comments to close us out with?
Marta and Bill, closing thought.
I'll just say that it's really extraordinary that you've been able to do what you've been able to do with the resources that have been at your disposal through this pandemic, as it's been highlighted earlier. But I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. I hope you are all able to go to the site someday and see the beauty of the place. But the sensitivity that you took to this place and the rigor with which you explored it, even remotely, is quite impressive. And I hope we didn't do a disservice in any of our comments to the great landscape work that you really did and how integral it was to the overall project. I feel that we started with those site plans and then moved into the perspectives, and it was natural for us to comment more on what we were looking at last. But I think the connections you were making to the barn and the development of the space in between across the board was really significant. The movement through the site, the way you mitigated grade, there's quite a bit of grade drop off, is really commendable. And so I hold you guys in high esteem for all that great work. I feel privileged to be able to have viewed it. So thank you guys.
Marta?
Well, I will add that as a representative of another public site, I have to tell the audience just how much those studios mean to us, because I think that, for one, as an administrator, I often don't have time to think about really much deeper. As you can see, they take such a deep dive into not only architectural design, but literature, music, all kinds of inspirations that are so crucial to inspire really something that is meaningful on a whole new level, and pull us in from our little bubble and have us sit down in front and try to understand. Even if you don't have architectural background, you have to really challenge yourself and think the way those creative people think. And it really stretches our thinking. It really expands our horizons. And this direct relation of an architect with a client in this kind of setting has such an important impact, because it doesn't only impact one homeowner, it impacts our whole community of museum sites and Frank Lloyd Wright community, and our public that benefits from our work. So I have such debt of gratitude to John for being friend of our sites and bringing students year after year and giving them all kinds of challenges, and for the grace that students have to deal with us and approach it with love and understanding. And thank you so much for doing that, and such an honor as always to be part of it. And thank you, Justin, for making me part of it. I love it. I love it. I'm glad that this is not the first critique I participated in, because, you know, guys, just so you know, usually it's like 20 people max and you feel much more comfortable, and here we have such a big audience. So I definitely could use more practice, but I really appreciate it.
Well, Marta, I thought your comments were wonderful, as well as Bill's and Justin's, and I really appreciate the community that's developed around these experiences. And for me as an educator, you know, student learning outcomes cannot be as joyful, as vivid, as meaningful as they currently are without your support, and without Justin and your support at two world caliber institutions, without Bill's support and the collaboration with BCJ, which are just priceless. And it just brings us into a sense for the students of reality, but yet within that reality, the complexity of human engagement and experience, and complex settings with issues that are so seminal to our time. So it couldn't happen without all of you. And of course, to my students, during this time in the midst of the pandemic, when it's not easy, and these individuals came together as community, and I'm so proud. I don't want to get emotional about it. I'm very proud. I'm very proud of them as human beings with great integrity and great love for each other and for the world around them. And during a time, you know, of our country's challenges, you know, pandemics and you know, a self-examination of our place in the world. And I think the students in the midst of all of it have found beauty. They've found community. They've found themselves as enfranchised in that discussion, and they've done it in such a compelling and wonderful way. And they never quit. And they were asked to do a lot. And I felt like I was just as demanding as the Reverend McLean with half again as long, and they never quit. And constant revisions to the work, and they just they had a stick-with-itness that I will always be moved by and impressed by. So at the end of the day, it's about them and this tremendous work that they did that will continue to inspire me. And I'm very, very, very grateful to them and to all of you for this opportunity. It's been wonderful.
Beautiful presentations. Before we end, we did record today, so check the Fallingwater website if you would like to share the recording. Also, the students' presentation boards are posted on our website. So if you go to our webinars section of fallingwater.org, you can visit them more closely by seeing them there. Thank you all again. Like John, it's just truly remarkable work. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin, to all of you. Well done.